Hello, my name is Daisy Cartwright. I want to explain a little bit about my background. I grew up deaf, and my family, including my parents, are deaf. There are many deaf individuals on my mother's side of the family, as well as some who are hard of hearing. On my father's side, he is the only deaf individual. He became deaf because he was sick as a child. Growing up, I went to the Western Pennsylvania School for the Deaf in Pittsburgh until I was about 8 years old. At that time, my family moved to California, and so I went to the California School for the Deaf at Riverside. I graduated from high school there. All of my family could sign as I was growing up, with some voice from time to time because there were some hard of hearing people in the family. We also had some family members who had developmental delays, but we had full access to communication, whether it be with sign or voice. The Western Pennsylvania School for the Deaf used an oral method, and my parents and grandparents weren't particularly pleased with that. When I moved to the Riverside School, they used total communication, which meant I had full access. The teachers, the staff, the house parents, everyone could sign. My parents were strong supporters of me while I was growing up. For example, while I was in an oral school, if I didn't understand things, I would go home and ask my parents, and they would help me understand what certain words meant and things like that. When I went to a school that had total communication, I had access to everything. I could ask questions and get answers to questions. I could communicate with my teachers. I really enjoyed having full access when I went to the Riverside School. After I graduated from Riverside, I went to Gallaudet College. There I majored in art history, and then I got my master's degree in rehabilitation counseling. They also have other MA degrees, but mostly I was focused on human services. That included school counseling, vocational rehabilitation counseling, sign language education, presenting workshops for deaf awareness and things like that. I've also been a consultant and a teacher. Now that I'm here in the northern Arizona region, my time is mostly occupied with a few things. I'm a family mentor for 0 to 3 for families that have deaf children. I also am a substitute teacher. I teach sign language classes for parents and staff at schools. I'm supposed to be retired, but I am enjoying working with deaf children and being out in the community. The deaf community, whether they be deaf, hard of hearing, or deaf-blind, deaf with special needs, etc., encounter many issues and concerns and have many needs as well. I've worked for many years in human services in a variety of fields, and I've seen quite a few things. I think it's critical to emphasize that deaf individuals must have a role model. They need an advocate, they need family mentors, they need a support system. I want to share a little bit of a background story before I get moving. Many, many years ago, I had been pondering how to work well with deaf students as well as deaf adults. I wanted to be a good advocate. During that time, I went to a workshop at a conference, and the title of that workshop was Nurturing Roles. I was kind of curious about it because I didn't know quite what it meant, but it seemed to be encouraging. So it wasn't particularly about deaf or hearing individuals, it was just general education. The woman who presented the workshop talked about her work with children and adults who had experienced trauma. It could be some kind of crisis that happened as a child. Perhaps they had a crisis in the home or they were abused, a variety of traumatic situations. Through her observations, she saw that some people who went through trauma grew up to have fairly healthy, successful lives, while other people who went through trauma did not. They shut down or their lives maintained a crisis state. And it could have been that the two children experienced the same type of trauma where one grew up to be fine and the other did not. She was really curious about what affected those individuals after the trauma, so she did some interviews with those who were able to live successfully after their trauma. Those individuals who were able to heal had someone who looked out for them, who cared about them, who gave them attention and support and nurtured them. They had a sense of hope, and they had an individual who cared about them, which they felt gave them value, and they were able to bond with another person. That gave them the strength to make it through this traumatic situation and get past it. In the back of their minds, they knew that they had this person who was looking out for them, talking to them, and supporting them. Those individuals who did not recover effectively from their trauma did not have someone to nurture them. They felt alone and isolated, and they were stuck in this loop of reliving their trauma, so they eventually shut down. The presenter said that she felt it was critical that all children have someone who functions in a nurturing role for them. It can be an older sister, it can be a parent, it can be a grandparent or a neighbor or a minister. It really doesn't matter who that person is. It can be any individual who looks out for them. If children have an adult in their life who they can bond with, who is looking out for them and supporting them, they're able to heal. I was thinking about that in line with deaf people. It resonated with my experience as well. I always had deaf people who were role models for me that I looked up to, whether they be teachers or just other deaf adults in my life. I always felt that I had a deaf role model, but I realized that not all deaf people have that same experience. Through my work, I saw that those individuals who had a good advocate or a good role model who helped explain the world to them and approach issues with them about being deaf or hard of hearing or anything else, they did better. They were able to learn and grow. They had tools and skills and knowledge, and they knew their rights. Those who had that kind of role model were empowered and confident and became successful. Those who didn't have that kind of opportunity, they didn't have a role model or an advocate, they tended to struggle more. They experienced more frustration and more doubts as they navigated the world. Those who had an advocate or a strong leader to look up to seemed to be more capable of navigating through life. They had the confidence to do so independently. From that experience, I felt that it was critical for all deaf and hard of hearing, deaf-blind, and deaf people with special needs to have a role model that they can look up to who is just like they are. They might be deaf, deaf-blind, hard of hearing, etc., but they can be a role model and an advocate for our deaf youth. It could be a family member or someone in the school, but that has a significant impact on a deaf child's life. I had that experience myself. There were several people over the years who had an impact or an influence on my life, including my family. So I encourage those who are thinking about what to do to ensure that the deaf and hard of hearing children in their lives have a strong role model.